Okay, so in this lesson, which is on your card number N20, we're going to be looking at finding a simple percentage of an amount. So that is basically our objective, finding a percentage, but it's going to be for more straightforward amounts, and we mustn't be using a calculator either. Okay, so these are the ones we're going to actually have a look at. So looking at the first one there, question 1, 10% of £42. Now, with something like 10%, we already know that 10% is the same as a tenth of something. So we're going to write it down in that form. First one, that's the same as 1/10 of 42. And when we're doing a tenth of something, we know we're dividing it by 10. So what we can do there is just move the decimal place one place to the left. So instead of 42, we end up with 4.2, because I've moved the decimal place one place to the left. Don't forget my units here. We're in pounds. And then, because we've got pence as well, we need to put our 0 on the end. So we get £4.20. Okay, for number 2, 50% this time. Again, this is another one of the straightforward ones. With 50%, we know that's the same as a half. So here I'm going to write it, or rewrite it, as a half of 13. So a half of 13, that's one we can do in our heads as well without a calculator. A half of 13 is 6.5. Don't forget the units again. Back at the question, and we've got centimetres, so 6.5 centimetres. For our third one, a little bit more difficult here, we've got 75% of something. We could think of that as 3/4 of something, because it's one that we know, a common one, but that's a little bit trickier. To do 3/4, we'd have to do a quarter first, then times it by 3. So a different way of doing it can be to split up our 75% into two nice easy chunks, like 50 and 25%. So let's do the 50% first. 50% of £18, well, we know 50% is the same as a half, so a half of £18 gives us £9. Then we've got the rest of the 75%, which is 25%. So let's work that bit out. 25% of £18, well, we know that 25% is going to be half what the 50% value was. So half of £9 is going to be £4.50. Okay, now the question asks for 75%. So we now need to add together our 50 and 25%, the values for those. So adding these two together, our 9 and our £4.50, and that will give us our total of £13.50. And then on to question 4, so 15% of 40 kilograms. Again, this is another one where we can split it up into nice, easy percentages to work out. So 15, I can split that up into 10% and 5%. So let's do 10% first of all. 10% of 40 kilograms. We know from the very first question that 10% is the same as dividing by 10. 10% of 40 kilograms, a tenth of 40 kilograms means moving the decimal place one place to the left. So 1/10 of 40 will give us 4 kilograms. Then we've got 5% left over. 5%, well, we've already worked out 10%, we know it's got to be half of what 10% was. So 10% was 4 kilograms, 5% must be 2 kilograms. I want to add those together now because I want what 15% is. Add together the values for 10% and 5% here, and I'll end up with 4 plus 2, which is 6, and don't forget the units, 6 kilograms. Okay, now on to my last one, 60% of 120 centimetres. So for this one, there's a number of ways I could do it. I could work out 10% first, and then times that by 6, but it's perhaps a little bit easier, I think, to split that up into 50% and 10%. So let's do the 50% first of all. 50% of 120 centimetres is going to be the same as a half of 120 centimetres. And I can do that one in my head. A half of 120 centimetres is 60 centimetres. I've still got 10% left over. So I'm now going to work out what the 10% bit would be. 10% of 120, remember back what I did on the first question there, 10% is the same as dividing it by 10. We're doing a tenth, so 1/10 of 120 centimetres gives me 12 centimetres. As in the previous questions, I now need to add those two together, so I want 60%. Add those two together, I've got 60 and 12, which gives me 72. Don't forget my units here, centimetres. There we go, there's my final answer. Okay, right, what I'd like you to do now is go on to the next slide. It's your turn. Have a go at doing these ones. Remember, don't use the calculator, but use the methods we've already spoken about. Okay, have a go at those. You'll need to pause the video, and then the answers will follow on afterwards.